Each of us comes into life with our own particular sets of skills, abilities, limitations, challenges. It's quite something to organize how we're going to approach our life. I've noticed somewhere along in somebody's life they decide their stance on the planet, how they're going to be here, how they're going to, what's their persona, and they start to do things that kind of define their style, and they practice. We practice, like especially as a teenager, we practice how we dress, how we look, what reflects back to us, and then as time goes on, other things come up. We're involved with life with other people, how we're going to live, how we're going to make a living, how we're going to raise a family. We have our own kids. Then we go on and we reflect back on our life and say, well, what has this all been all about? And we compare ourselves to others and feel sad or happy or proud or think we're superior or inferior. And all that gets pretty maddening. And I'll suggest that that's all interesting, but maybe it's not the point. What begins to make sense? What begins to organize all this reflection, all this consternation, all this elation, all this fun? What falls into the simpleness of what's going on? Recently, in the project I've been doing with a university, we were challenged with looking at education from a single perspective, and that was that all things, whether you're learning arithmetic or a social skill or how to fix a car or how to speak plainly or how to transform your anger or how to receive feedback without going into shame, whatever it is, that when we have this practice of using everything to take us more into our loving, and that when we did that collectively, this enabled a certain process to take place on the planet, which allowed the planet to be more loving. And when I first got into looking at that, that seemed quite far out, even for someone who'd been teaching, been in the business of education, holistic education, not spiritual education, but education in spiritual perspective, and spiritual education, doing classes in developing greater spirituality and the skills and so forth that went with that, or how to look at a curriculum in terms of developing oneself first, learning the subject matter second, real keys to a holistic perspective to education. So what is this about us that fascinates us with life? It causes us to look more deeply. It starts to sense, or at least when this starts, when you start to sense, there's more to it than learning my ABCs and going to work and being a good citizen and growing old and having a retirement. See, there's something deeper than this. There's something more essential. There's something that all this is serving. And what is that? Well, this posing this question is everything in life to teach us love, to be more love, to be more loving, but also then to be more love. So this takes a bit of reflection, like when we get angry or when somebody hurts us or offends us or we fail something, or we're learning how to prepare dinner and serve people. All that, like, what is that about? How do we use that? Well, there's some simple ways, some obvious ways, like when we practice gratitude for whatever's occurring. It brings the element of love into it. So we look at something that bad happened to us once, and we look at what we learned or grew, how we grew from that. It was gratitude. But am I, grateful for someone abusing me, say? How could I be grateful for that? It hurt. It felt rotten. It's like it wasn't fair. Or was it? So when we're learning ego, and this is not something good or bad, but a lot of our life starts out learning ego, a sense of ourself that we create a belief system to support out of what's reflected back to us in relationship to the drives and desires that take us into doing things. And out of that we start building this persona. It can be secure, insecure, we can feel shameful, we can feel like a victim, believe we're a victim, believe we're unlovable, believe we're lovable, believe we could do anything, believe we can be successful in anything. See, full spectrum. We can believe life is meaningful, we can believe it has no meaning, we can believe there's a God, we can believe there's no God. See, all this is in some kind of process based on our interpretation of our experience. So there's this drive into life to do this or that, towards that, we're attracted towards this, we're repelled by that. We get into experience with it, things happen, people do things. We do things. We reflect on that, and we decide things and that goes into our senses, our concept of who we are. Pretty convincing. And it's all like integrated into our physical body so that when we move away from this concept of ourselves, we feel insecure. When we get the reinforcement we're looking for, we feel better. So we start to try to manage other people to reflect back to us our idea of ourselves. That sounds like it's conscious. Maybe it is conscious. Now for sure it's unconscious. So here we are in our life unconscious, discreetly, sub rosa, invisibly collaborating, colluding with other people to continue to reinforce our sense of self, our belief about who we are and how we see life to be. We're colluding to make it be like that. So that's a perception of life. And that we're all colluding to do that. Kind of sci-fi a little bit. Okay, so how life is right now, it's people walking down the street, I'm colluding with them to have reality show up this certain way and to interpret things with certain meanings that may or not be the way it really is. one of the first steps then is to consider that that is what we're learning, that the colluding we're doing is a lab project on classroom earth to discover what consciousness is and what the nature of our consciousness is and what the consciousness of the universe is and the physics or the spiritual physics of that. So it's set up for us to learn that. So if we can begin to understand how we're doing it and how we're transforming it and how it's evolving of itself, because it's designed to evolve. And so in terms of our learning, how we're situated in that. So if we take the perspective that our life is purposeful and everything that's happened to us has been meaningful and loving, even though we can't tell that, but loving in the sense that it's giving us to get exactly what we need. So this implies that there's something in us that motivates us, that has some kind of fulfillment in its nature, something implicit in us that's intentional, that has an intentionality, and it's unconsciously moving us into certain relationships, into certain circumstances, into certain places, to have certain kinds of experiences. And that there's something deeper, some deeper intelligence permeating that helps coordinate it all. So you say, well, let's just say it's a theory and not the truth, just so you don't have to get hung up on proving it or disproving it. It's like, I have a car, I want to learn to drive it. I don't want to prove or disprove it's a car. So I just want to learn how to steer it and drive it and get it on the road and get where I want to go. So there we are. See, so that driving the car becomes a metaphor for our life. It's easier to learn to drive a car these days than when I was growing up. You had clutches and gear shifts, and it was a little bit more complicated. And pretty soon all that came second nature and just went underneath, and it was automatic. So when it became automatic inside of us, then we developed automatic transmissions, reflexivity. So the fixity is an illusion. This thing is always evolving. We'll probably experienced some of that. Somebody suggested something, or we had a realization, and life looked different. Wow, it's more full, it's more alive, it's more lit up. I remember after I was in a sensory deprivation experiment in the Army, and they put us in this room without any light or sound for 3 days. I guess they were exploring. This was just after the, not too long after the 50s, the Korean War, and so they were trying to figure out how people got brainwashed or how they could affect their perception and change how they see things. And so I was in this room without any light or sound for 3 days, and was really diminished the input of stimulus. So the stimulus you have is just from within yourself. And so some of us handled that really well, and some of us after about an hour had to get out of there. Not that the door was locked, but they shut the door and said, stay in there. And the door's not locked. We could have, any one of us walked out whenever we wanted to. So my experience was that after a while, I would start to lose my sense of physical body boundary. Every shrill sound I'd ever heard kind of hallucinated through my ears, and that was a little scary, a little frightening. And it was just quiet. plane would fly over and I'd hear it vibrate in the ground. And the place started to light up. So it's like the way I described it to myself at the time is I was just inside my own consciousness looking around. And there was these forms where light came out of them. And different dimensions. So, like some were geometric and some it was like I was in the sea and the fish were glowing. So there were dimensions of this. So I had a distinct experience that, once you tune out the physical reality where you see and know things by reflection, light reflecting off of things, perception reflecting off of things. In this deeper dimension, everything is its own light source. You see it because light comes out of it. So that was very impactful because I grew up reading my own metaphysical book, my own book on consciousness, was the Bible, and I was raised a Baptist, so you had to work out your own relationship with God, they say, but then they would tell you, but this is the dogma, so this is the relationship with God you have. So you had to take this dogma from the outside. So I had these two things going. You want me to see it this way, and then you want me to work out my own experience with it. My own experience sees it this way. So those came together in that experience that, I'm on one of these deeper levels and light's coming out of things instead of bouncing off of things. So I'm having a direct, sensual, with my nervous system experience of a reality that's not physical or doesn't seem physical. It somehow moves through my body and around my body. And I have sensation, and I'm walking around in it, and I'm seeing these forms, and I can look at them, and they're just floating in the air, glowing. And I see them because light comes out of them. So that sounds like those things I read in the Bible about, when Paul on the road got taken up into this third heaven, or wherever it was. Like, that sounds very similar. Not as dramatic as it was in the Bible, but light is coming out of things. So, so that made it tangible. Like, this is not, these spiritual worlds are not an abstraction. They're places, and that through altering our perception, we can begin to experience them through our feeling, through sensitive energy, through sight, through hearing. Our senses aren't limited to the physical sensation, 5 senses. So you have the physical 5 senses, and across that come awareness of these other dimensions. And so when I came out of that experience, life was alive and my perception was different. Everything seemed very alive and bright. It was kind of fortunate too because, we were in the front end of the 60s, so everybody was trying to break this open and get an awareness of these deeper dimensions. So there was people experimenting with drugs, people experimenting with transcendental meditation, being yogas, so there's this whole spectrum of Christian mysticism, like, what was Teresa of Avila doing, or John the Beloved, or St. John of the Cross. These people were having experiences, of these other worlds, or Swedenborg, the engineer who turned spiritual scientist and discovered that by focusing a certain way, he could go up into its other dimensions. What was that about? See? So that really shaped my way of seeing things, so that when I started, say, in my psychology classes studying Jung, and he was talking about the unconscious. I said, yeah, that's an unconscious, but you can also be conscious of it by going there. Or people talk about dying and go to heaven. Well, wait a minute. You can go to heaven before you die because it's right here. And so it's totally shifted my viewpoint of my own religion. A lot of people had to go adopt another religion like Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism and then come back to their Christian teaching to get that it was a living teaching. So it really changed how I would interpret those stories, any scriptural stories I would read. So it became a more dynamic thing to me that this learning process wasn't just two-dimensional or three-dimensional. It was multidimensional. So when we learn something, it changes our physics, it changes our energetic framework, it changes our cellular activity, it changes our genetics. So what does this mean? Beware of your mathematics class? Well, we wonder because some people get trapped in their intellect and trapped in their mentality, and it seems to limit not only the way they perceive and the way they look at the world, but it seems to affect their organism. They're a little tighter and rigid. I know I became very armored in my youth to protect myself and had to undo that later. And really felt it that way, like it was the undoing. In fact, even today, we're undoing some crystallized forms in my body so the vitality can come back into it. So there's this interaction. So in this apparent separateness, which having individual bodies reinforces, there's this less apparent unity, almost said lunacy, to us it's one thing that brings us into a unity. So it sets up so the setup is that there's this individual sense of individuality and individual awareness that can become aware of unity and still be aware of its individual experience of the unified field. So is the evolutionary end game here, that the driving purpose in an individual life is to evolve into the consciousness of being able to have an individual experience of universal loving. And to somehow this play a role in the evolution of everything. Well, I'm beginning to think so, that collectively, as we each wake up to a different sense, at some point, we notice there's more to us than who we thought we were as an ego. And when we look at the dynamic of the ego, it's always functioning on, in terms of responsibility for life and its reality, it's always functioning on shame and blame. So we're always trying to shame someone, blame someone, or blame ourselves or shame ourselves. In other words, we always have to find somebody whose fault it is in a legal sense. So we have this law process that's a right and wrong and consequence. And consequence is good. You do this and this happens, see? And that's one approach. And then there's this other approach where we go along, and I've noticed this in myself, like when I had a realization or an insight that changed my character and resolved some mean habit I had or tendency, my life would shift, and I would no longer have experiences that subjected me to that. So it's like, So when you wake up more to your essence and truth and deconstruct those beliefs you have that tend you in that direction, the consequence is discontinued. So there's a choice, almost like a curriculum choice, between the law, and so a lot of the learning programs are set up on the law, and you have to pass this test and you learn that stuff. And then there's this other learning program that as you wake up more to your inherent genius, the learning of situations and learning of information becomes easier. See? So you have one's based on fear and one's based on love. In a more true sense, we're mixing those together all the time. And progress that way. So the lesson then being that, oh, we have these two dynamics in life. This feels good, this feels bad, this is liberating, this is confining. So another quality of this dualistic level is fixing. So it's, do we fix or do we change the reality so the circumstances change? Well, when we learn to be present and engage the life as it is, as it arises, this other sense of self wakes up. And this sense of self, it's like the only way to describe it is it's a soul self, and it looks as good as bad as equal values because it's experience, and we learn from that who we are, and as we learn what and who we are, we engage life differently. We have more resilience, we have more inherent capacity, we have more genius comes into us. There's just something evolutionary different about us when we have this kind of tripartite sense of life instead of being dualistic. Or in addition to being dualistic, it's also unitive. So that's the key to the body. The body's bilaterally symmetrical, it's dualistic, it's designed to learn in a dualistic reality, and it's occupied by this soul that is still connected to the unity. So the first step in learning then is to learn that's our nature and that's how we learn. So some things we memorize and some things we know by revelation. And we have to be able to tell which is the appropriate approach in given circumstance. So this becomes very exciting. Oh yeah. So what's the nature of this soul unitive? What's this shift from learning from the basis of ego, where we identify ourselves by what's reflected back to us, and that's how we make it, and so we control life through manipulating life to maintain this image of ourselves. Well, what happens if we step out of that? We don't destroy it or give it away or not appreciate it, but we take from it and identify differently. We start identifying with this essence. It goes deeper and deeper and goes right into this field of loving. See, so this I am, see, I'm this. And that shifts the magnetic flow so that we're now living as a centered consciousness that has a relationship to life and what arises in life. However, it's not defined by what arises in life any longer. It's not defined by the accolades or the curses, not defined by the negative viewpoint of someone or the positive viewpoint. I'm not good or bad, but based on what people say about me and how they reflect back to me. I have to respond to that. But I'm this consciousness that's deep and loving, and I'm going to respond appropriately. And I can respond however's needed to the situation, whether it's soft and tender or forceful and stern. Either way, it's neutral in that sense, other than I'm going from being to doing. See, that's a radical shift in how we see ourselves on the planet. then other things start to make sense. And in my sense, this inner alignment is also the same energy that's been approaching me as a reflection back from the horizon. And so there's this, life becomes this learning relationship, reflexive relationship with myself, where the things I am still unconscious of arise in my life so that I can respond to them and organize them in myself so that I'm more conscious. So when I build meaning, I'm building consciousness. And in that I'm also connecting to consciousness. This also rises a sense that, because of this unique awareness that I have as a human being, am I really the instrument of something bigger that's coming to know itself through my process in a deeper level? That there's some deeper will functioning through me that's congruent with what I'm developing as a soul consciousness through this reflexive universe that keeps shifting as I evolve. And so as my learning, the universe is learning. So that becomes very fascinating, right? And if you embrace that with acceptance, you don't have to, it's not truth or false. It's accept the possibility of the nature of yourself. So this is kind of challenging, because if we have our favorite victim story, and we keep using that victim story and telling it and promoting it to reinforce that, oh yeah, I'm a victim, it's clear I was victimized. But does that define me? Does trauma define me? See? Or does it challenge me to define myself in a bigger way? So to resolve a trauma, I need to go to a bigger place inside that has authority over the definition of the trauma, the definition of the victim. See, well, that becomes rather exciting. So then I can start looking at the places I still have reaction, I'm still small, believe I can't do it. So I start looking at those beliefs, those limiting beliefs, those beliefs that tell me I'm separate, and where'd they come from? And then I start to discover, well, some of them I made up, some of them I decided, and some of them I acquired growing up, and some of them people seem to implant there. Something implanted them there. Well, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. I still have to deal with it. So I take responsibility. Oh, not too fast. When you take responsibility from the ego, you go into shame and blame, and then you just sink yourself. Like, if I look at a war or genocide or dropping bombs on kids, am I responsible here? And then I go into shame, and then I go into blame, and then I try to blame our government, or blame the bad guys, or blame Al-Qaeda, or I got to find somebody to blame and make the enemy, and I got to fight them. And all I'm doing is voting for, let's have more fighting in the world and blaming each other and making each other wrong. And so then I have my Christian Al-Qaeda who say I can't have authority over my own body and decide what to do with it, that the government needs to own it and tell me what to do. Or say, no, we can't have government, but we still have to control your body. So let's do away with government, but let's leave the laws in there that say you can't decide what to do with your body, because we want to control you like we did 1,000 years ago. So when we look at Al-Qaeda, it's like, oh, that's just a metaphor for a certain conservative attitude inside that wants to go back to a time when we believed that reality was men dominating women and them women serving, and they had to find their life and their processed through the man. And they were subjected to that, and they were property. So that's really cool. And so let's keep that reality going. Well, you can see how crazy this gets. See, so we say, well, let's clean up this Al Qaeda consciousness. How do we do that? Well, we'll have to start maybe by not electing them to our Congress. So see, like, oh my goodness, we elected Al Qaeda to our Congress. See, because it's a metaphor for our kind of thinking. So we're starting to take responsibility here, see, and say, well, what do we do about this? Oh, well, I've noticed that I can see that because I woke up. So do I solve that at the level? Do I go like polarize? Well, I might. Like, let's vote differently. Let's stir up a consciousness raising process where we have people vote differently. That's one level. So, but there's something essential here, I think, that has to precede that. First, we have to need to reflect back inside and discover, where inside am I harsh with myself? Where am I unloving to myself? Where am I? Who are the second-class citizens inside of me? Is there something about my own nature I'm repressing? Is there something about the feminine qualities in myself? We all have both. Like the loving relational side of me. How is that doing? Is there ways I still react or I still have trauma? Is there some child inside of me that's still injured? Is there some woman inside I'm still injuring? Is there some man inside I'm still injuring? See, did the concept of male or female or manhood or womanhood, was I injured by that because the culture was shaping everybody in a certain stereotypic way and excluding anyone that was not like that? And is that so ingrained in my nature? You see. So, okay, let's go make peace with the Al Qaeda inside of me. One time I talking to a group, and this is back in the, I don't know, 70s or 80s, and well, let's look at the Nazi inside of us. It's the Hitler. We got to resolve the little Hitler inside of us. And oh my goodness, and they just really reacted like, oh, no, I'm not like that. And it was so scary, the way they rose up and say, wow, we don't have little Hitlers inside of us. And I said, okay. So that's an interesting reaction. Well, I found that when we keep taking this loving into places, it keeps changing these beliefs and starts to influence the collective. These unconscious minds are colluding all the time. And so it goes this way to limit us. If we wake up in here and start feeding, toxins come in, same thing that brought the toxins in, we can put loving and it takes the toxin. And the loving goes out and it starts corrupting the toxins. So there's something very dynamic about this person you are. That when we start to really get that there's a bridging inside of us between the densest dimensions and the most transcendent dimensions, and there's a geometry and a physics of this that makes us a really dynamic bridge between heaven and earth, and that we can, if we work it right, we can bring energy through this and start reflecting it out through life, and it starts correcting our grammar, in a sense, the grammar of our consciousness, so that it's whole. And that at some point that takes on a vibration that starts to shift the environment around us, because we're pulling it through from and unfolding it from this underlying field of loving into this dimension of where things are trapped in duality. Oh, that really changes the learning process. And so, then we begin to realize that yeah, this classroom earth was just set up for us to get this, that we're creating all this, and that when we step into our wholeness, that is our nature, our soul nature, we're no longer needing to do shame and blame or control others to get the loving we need. We are the loving and we need. And our nature is then to, from the presence of that complete love, take the intentionality in our heart and seek out our life. And then there's a nature in that loving that seeks it in others. It's doing that anyway, but seeks to waken it in others so we can share and have relationship through this, rather than me controlling you so I can feel loved. It's let's wake up together so we can have this relational love from soul to soul, and that changes the reality. See? It changes the culture and changes the social fabric, so that we're then living in a different context. So let's just close our eyes for a moment and be present with this, and see what's moving around inside of you because of this viewpoint. Move into your loving. Let's practice. If there's pain, take the pain to 100% pain and see what happens. Does it stay pain, or does it change into something else? Perhaps it's just your belief restricting the joy and the loving that make the pain. See? So we live in a time we're on a frontier. Perhaps it's such that humanity has never been there before. So we need to go to even a deeper level of our nature. In this primordial inception that began whatever we are, there's a relationship, there's a connection to a beingness. It's been with us all along and is now can join us as a mentor, as a colleague, as a transcendence that's present in the now. It's like it's always been a guardian of our unfoldment out of God. And it's been with us all this time, so it shares that experience. And in that, where that meets us inside, the genius of the universe arises. So in this practice of being present, being in the now, and engaging what is, rather than our projection onto it of our beliefs and prejudice and fears. Only possible from a love-based reality. Fear-based reality puts us right back in duality, and we see demons and we have to fight them. We may see demons in the loving, but we're in a consciousness that has ascendancy, that has an authority. So we can decide our relationship. We can decide our response out of the loving, which challenges what's present in a very different way. See? What is our behavior? Well, we may not know. We learn to reside in this primordial genius, because that consciousness that is aware of the the arising next moment, the arising future. See? And as that future arises, we engage it with what is needed to respond to it. So it's a great trust in self. It's a great ability to be nothing in the everything. And that's the nature of complete love. Complete love is that love's in everything. So everything we do or want is supported unconditionally. And so we can have it any way we want it. We can drop it down into the war and the domination and the strife and the duality and the fear and the hate. Or we can change it and line it up with our loving and our seeing the wholeness in things and our starting to practice transforming everything into loving, start being grateful, and in that change the reality of the situation. And also then on that edge of places we've never been before, we are participating in a consciousness arising that supplies what is needed to meet that situation and develop what's there and to instruct us as to the nature of this new reality. So take a deep breath and just drop into the awareness of that, into the loving, into the anticipation, into the peace. And all your survey is cooperating with bringing you into a deeper realization of that loving. Your classroom earth is here to serve you to unravel the tangles, to free the hurts, to liberate the limiting judgments that create pain, to transform your hurt into joy, to show you that the permanence of life is this evolving capacity to love, the evolving capacity to be conscious in that loving as an active agent in creating our reality. So just open your hearts and accept this blessing here, this influx of awareness, this unfolding of self that brings you into a perspective of how to excel in classroom earth.